relatives of Bennington County, do you hear us inside of there? Our relatives inside of Bennington County, we wanted to remind you that you're not forgotten, that we love you, that we remember you, that we know that you're in there as a result of an unjust system. And us, we came together, your relative, to stand with you as we stand against the President of the United States, as we fight for our land. And we remember you, and we'll make prayers for you. So we're here to stand with everybody throughout this nation to call out white supremacy, to call out an end to systematic racism and oppression of our communities and our people. Tomorrow, the President of the United States will be coming to the heart of the Asheti Shakoi, and he's not welcome here. And we're here to send a message that we want Mount Rushmore closed and the return of that land back to the indigenous people. So we're here in solidarity and remembering that all throughout the system of injustice and white supremacy, you'll find indigenous people. And we also want to remind that as we do this work, we're standing in solidarity with our black brothers and sisters against this racist system of oppression. We have fought hard and long time to protect our land, and will not continue to stand for our land to be stolen from us and desecrated. So we stand at this time, at this moment in this history, and we continue on a struggle that our ancestors who have come before have fought for. Whose land? Whose land?
Your voice will not be silenced. We will walk upon Trump tomorrow. We say enough. We'll take back this stolen land, one rock at a time. If it's starting with Mount Rushmore, and it's not going to end. It will never end as long as we have breath in our lungs, as long as we have blood in our bodies. We will keep marching. We will keep shouting. We will keep protesting. No, protecting. Because this is our land, and we're going to take it back, and there's nothing they can do about it.
Our common enemy is white supremacy and systematic racism. We've seen what happened to our black brothers and sisters. We know that the movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter stands with us as indigenous people as we collectively fight for our liberation, for the collective movement for our people. And our goal is not just to resist. Our goal is to radically transform this country so that it works for everybody.
This is sacred land. This is Lakota land. This is my land. I can stand right here.
The aggression today was come out from you guys.
We want our land back.
We ain't going nowhere. This is our land. It's been our land for thousands of years. To the Bennington County Sheriff's Department, to the Highway Patrol, this is a warning to each and every one of you. You are unlawfully on our land without consent of our tribal leaders, in violation of our treaties. You have an opportunity now that we're giving you to stand down and vacate our land. Whose land? Our land! Whose land? Our land! This is the land of the Asheti Shakoi. And we're prepared to stand our ground. Today has been a proud day to be Lakota. Today has been a proud day to be indigenous. We shut down Mount Rushmore for 3 hours. And we did it in a good way. We felt that power from our ancestors. So Wopila Tonka Achichi Apolo to each and every one of you. Hands behind your back! Hands behind your back! Hands behind your back! I'm not doing it. For our people, for our Black Hills, for the Asheti Shakoi.
Pisha Iyongona. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to NDN Live. I'm Sarah Sunshine Manning with NDN Collective, and I'll be hosting this evening's conversation as we unpack some recent breaking news around the charges against 21 land defenders who were arrested on July 3rd at an action in the Black Hills, leading up to the visit of former President Donald Trump last summer. Among those arrested were NDN Collective's president and CEO, Nick Tilsen, who was facing multiple charges, including 3 misdemeanors and 4 felonies, adding up to a potential 16 and a half years in prison. Nick will be joining us on this conversation today. Also joining us is Krystal Tubols, director of NDN Collective's LandBack campaign, who was also there on the ground in the Black Hills that day and also arrested and was facing a misdemeanor charge. And last but not least, we're also joined by Nataanii, Indigenous hip-hop artist and land defender who was also present on the ground that day in the Black Hills and also arrested, facing misdemeanor charges. Thanks so much for joining us today, Nick, Krystal, and Nataanii. So before we dive in to this really rich conversation that will give Nick and the land defenders an opportunity to speak to things in a way that mainstream media doesn't always allow, I want to set the stage a little bit and tell a little bit about how we got here, a little bit of context. For those of you that joined us at the top of the hour, you may have seen the Hey Sapa video, but I want to talk a little bit more about how we landed here. So we're here to talk about these charges, but before we get into that, it cannot be understated that the stand that the 200 plus land defenders took that day was for a very specific and intentional purpose, one that goes back generations, in fact, going back to the first struggles for Indigenous sovereignty, human rights, and land rights. The stand that was taken that day was done in the heart of the Black Hills, calling essentially for 2 things. Number 1, for the return of the Black Hills to their original Indigenous stewards, and number 2, for Mount Rushmore as a shrine of white supremacy to be called out and named for what it is, as a desecration of sacred Indigenous land. And in this time that we're in of calling out and dismantling white supremacy in America, and during this past year of uprising and reckoning, we can't forget that the roots of this country are in fact roots of white supremacy, roots of genocide, of displacement of Indigenous people thought to be inferior to white settlers, which is exactly why we see presidents like Abraham Lincoln and George Washington plastered onto the mountain of the Indigenous people that they sought to exterminate. So
Well, I can jump right in. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I think part of what Sarah was doing there was setting context for. Oh, we have Sarah back too. If you want to finish out.
Thank you so much, Nick. Thank you for the quick pivot, taking the host role really quickly. We're real life. We're in our homes, doing our best in our home studios with our spotty Wi-Fi. So thanks so much, everyone, for bearing with us. So getting back into the context here. So yesterday, NDN Collective broke some big news, really big news, news that we've kind of been aware of, that was building and mounting. And yesterday, we officially announced that the charges against all of the land defenders and Nick will be dropped. This is really huge, and many more stories since our announcement came out. And so today we're going to be talking about those charges and give Nick an opportunity to set the stage for how we got here in the first place. So Nick, before we get into the bigger discussion and reaction of the charges being dropped, let's talk about how we got here, and in particular, how exactly you went from facing 16 and a half years, nearly 2 decades behind bars. You're a father, you're a member of the community. So essentially, thinking of the potential of losing 2 decades of your life to these charges being dropped. Tell us the backstory behind this.
Okay, I can hop right in. Hamadaki api, Nick Tilsen, Amachi api, Chantea Washten api Tuzapalo. Good to see each and every one of you. Out there in Facebook land. I don't come here all the time. But I think how we got here
is because we backed them into a corner, because our movement backed them into a corner. I mean, think about it. These are racially and politically motivated charges to begin with, and we knew that. And them being politically and racially motivated charges to begin with, the more phone calls that people made, the more petitions that people signed, the more letters that people wrote, the more that people talked about how, about this in the media, it changed the narrative, and our narrative became our weapon, and our voices, the very thing that they were setting out to silence, became the weapon in which we used to shift the narrative. And so it was the outcrying of support from for all of the land defenders that came from across the country and came from within South Dakota, that continued to back the prosecutor in much ways in a corner, where it no longer they no longer had a political upside to continue the prosecution. They no longer had political upside, because the more that they continued prosecuting us, in many ways, the more it helped our cause and made them look foul. And so that's the crazy thing about what direct action does, right? It holds the mirror up to the oppressors. It holds the mirror up to those that are trying to oppress us. And so I think we got here because we mobilized our people, because we built power, and we didn't back down. And we stood our ground, just like we did on July 3rd. And we were prepared to go all the way with them if that's what needed. And partners throughout the country supported that. And the other thing I wanted to say, that I think part of what we got here too is spiritual power. I think that because of the stand that we took in the Kesapa, and maybe Nataanii and Krystal had part of experiences too, but it sparked something in our people. It sparked something. It made our people feel good. And so a lot of people, they went into ceremonies and they were praying for us. Because they felt connected to what happened up there. Even though they physically weren't there, they felt connected to what happened up there, and they agreed with what happened up there. And so I want to reiterate that there's the organizing strategy, the narrative strategy, the political strategy, but it can never be underscored, the spiritual power. And I don't know how many different people came up to me and said, "Hey, we're praying for you. We're praying for you guys. We're praying for you." And I'm sure Nataanii and Krystal heard that from many of the people in their circles too. And people really were, and you could feel it. And so all of these different things, I think, contributed to the narrative, and that we made it so unpopular for them to come after us, because it was wrong in the first place, and they were on the wrong side of history. And so, and I also want to say clearly, like, straight up, like, we didn't come to them with a deal. They came to our doorstep with the deal. They came to us with a deal, because they knew that they didn't have a case. They knew that we were standing in our power. They knew that they weren't going to be able to win. So they came to us in that way. And so, and that's what we wanted, because we said we weren't going to back down, and that we said we weren't going to back down on what we believe in and what we stand for. And so that's how I see how this thing, played out. And no matter what the prosecutor's office says, or no matter what people say in the media, the difference is this: it went from 16 and a half years to community service, which is some shit I'll be doing in my community anyway. So, like, and also, like, getting all the charges dropped for all the brothers and sisters, and I made that very clear, that when we take action like this, when we have an opportunity to stick together, and stand together and support one another, like, we build power. We build power that way. And so we were able to, negotiate charges being dropped for everybody, because in my opinion, like what we started on July 3rd is just the beginning of something that we're going to continue on doing for quite a long time. So we got to be in this for the long game.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And you know, a lot happened between now and July 3rd. You know, there have been multiple movements across the country for racial justice. There have been parallels that showed this stark contrast, this disparity in how Indigenous people in the state of South Dakota, and obviously not just in the state of South Dakota, but looking specifically at the charges brought to you from the state, where you're essentially facing 2 decades for a nonviolent offense that they're really working hard to paint as violent, you know, just in the same way that Indigenous people have been painted historically as the savages, as the bad guys, right? We see other parallels where, you know, at the Capitol insurrection, we saw a supporter of Donald Trump sitting there holding a shield. And at the same time, you're being charged for being in possession of a shield. And seeing that contrast, so many people quickly caught on to that and were able to see that, you know, double standard in how Indigenous people are treated. Also in the state of South Dakota, we saw the state's attorney general, you know, be slapped on the wrist with a really small penalty for killing a man while driving under the influence. And meanwhile, you're facing nearly losing, you know, 2 decades of your life to the system. And so it became very obvious, I think, and in the time that we've been, you know, our communities have been organizing, there have been some really great moments where the situation stood out as being just as you named, institutional racism, an abuse of power. So thanks so much for grounding us in that context. In a bit, we're going to talk a little bit more about those competing narratives. But first, I want to shift to Krystal and Nataanii. So Krystal and Nataanii, thanks so much for joining us. Krystal and Nataanii were both there on the ground that day. They were both, you know, putting their bodies on the line. And this isn't the only time that they've done this. Both of them are longtime organizers, deeply embedded in their communities, making sacrifices for their people. So Krystal and Nataanii, as folks who were on the ground that day, what does this victory mean to you, and what is the big takeaways for you? Let's start with Krystal.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Piveshev, Mene Wosta Nanehav. Again, Krystal Tubles, it's really an honor to be here this evening with you all. Just thinking back on that day, I think the most obvious and probably understated meaning of today's victory or of yesterday's victory is relief. And I think just like being realistic about the emotional burden and the heaviness that we carry when we do this work and when we make these decisions. And I think as someone that was also sued by energy transfer partners, you know, under the RICO Act, like I know what that weight is. I know the emotional burden that we carry, and I'm sure that Nick and Nataanii can both speak to that too. But this impacts not only us, right, in the work that we're doing, but it impacts our families and our children and people that care about us and our communities. And so I think the biggest takeaway and the biggest, you know, the biggest thing for me is the relief, you know, like just knowing that he doesn't have to face that time, and that we are not facing those misdemeanors as well. And these are not things that we carry forward. Also just want to like highlight what he's talking about, what Nick mentioned, like being spiritually aligned. You know, this work that we do, we don't do it because it's a job, and we don't do it because, you know, we're paid and all of these things. Like we do this work because we're guided to it. We do this work because our people need this. We do this work because we want others to join with us and to do this work as well. And I think that speaks to how spiritually aligned that it was on July 3rd. When we were all up there together, things wouldn't have worked out the way that they did had things not been spiritually guided and aligned that day. And had like our ancestors and those spirits not been with us that day, it would not have worked out this way. But it did. And that speaks to how powerful our prayers and our beliefs are, right? And I think some of the other points that I see also is just like, this is just the start. You know, Nick alluded to that, like this is just the beginning. You know, and this is the start of a major shift, not only in indigenous communities and native communities across Turtle Island, but globally. Things are shifting right now. Things are changing. And LandBack is very much a central part of that. And our calls that day are very much a central part of that. And that also speaks to like the deep, deep relationships that we have across movements right now. And I think LandBack has been doing a lot of work of just building out those relationships across all these movements, and we honor and respect and call attention to the work and the energy that was built by our Black brothers and sisters with when George Floyd was murdered, in the uprisings that happened, and the energy and the momentum that was built opened the door for us to be able to go in on July 3rd and to stand our ground and call attention to Mount Rushmore, the ultimate shrine of like white supremacy in the heart of our sacred lands. And so just want to really call attention to that and really thank, like, and just really give a heartfelt gratitude to our relatives that are in the struggle across all of these movements, right? And I think that was a big part of how July 3rd played out. It's a big part of the support that we received to get these charges dismissed. And so I just really want to say thank you to all of our relatives that are out there in the struggle, organizing and showing up with us. I also think that it puts us in a really powerful position. It's a shift in power, like a very clear shift in power. And it positions us to continue to do the work and support our targeted and incarcerated relatives that are still in there right now. And so just want to remember them on this call as well, or on this webinar. But for me, those are the major takeaways of what this victory means and what the dismissal of these charges mean.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Krystal. And Nataanii, so, this is, as I mentioned at the start of this conversation, this is also a way of life for you. You've been on multiple front lines. You show up wherever you can. And so for this particular event and, with these charges, what does this victory mean to you? And what is your take on the gravity of this moment?
First of all, I'm gonna talk up each on Western, I bet you up low. It's good to be here today with Indian Collective. It's good to see familiar faces. I'm currently on the West Coast right now, and it's nice to just connect again. Yesterday, when I first heard the news, I was happy. It felt good. It felt like I could move around again. Whenever you're facing court or any kind of charges, it kind of keeps a grip on you. It kind of doesn't allow you to move freely, and that means a lot to me, to be able to go to a front line again right now without having this hanging over my head. You know what I'm saying? So, whenever I do go to front lines, and if I the goal is always not to get charged, not to get caught, with things that we do. But we had to make a stand that day, and it was a decision that was a split-second decision, whether, it's important to show people what you're willing to go to for the Chesapa, and our people need to see that, especially right now. There was a lot of people there, and I understand people's situations and why they wouldn't take that stand as well. But the more we do things like this together, the stronger that we become. And it shows how much we believe in each other. Just like what happened at the courthouses in Custer, just like what in the 70s, just like what happened at Wounded Knee. It's a cohesive movement. Cohesiveness is important in those situations. And I'm very proud of our people that day. People were ready to throw down. LandBack to me means throw down. That's what it means. It means get ready. You might get arrested, but don't have fear. Like, you can't have fear in these situations. And that day was beautiful. Just like Krystal said, our spiritual way of life protected us, and just like Nick was saying as well. And in those black kills in the Chesapa, there's a feeling that I know we all get. and it's a feeling of protection. I think just as much as we love the Chesapa loves us. It remembers us, and it remembers our spirits, and it remembers our stories, it remembers our ancestors, it remembers the songs, the prayers, the pipes, the tobacco, the chinchasha. So honoring the Chesapa in ways like that in any of our sacred sites, all over, no matter what nation you are, is what we should be aiming to in these 2020s. You know, it's getting those sites back. You know, it's getting it back. It's getting our prayers back. It's getting our right to pray there back. You know, and without red tape and yellow ropes and, you know, having to go through park services and whatnot. You know, we have a sundance out in the Chesapa at the Wind Cave National Park, and, you know, there's a lot that we have to do to present the treaty to them and explain why we need to pray there. And that shouldn't be the case. We should just be able to go there, you know.
It's powerful, Nataanii. Thank you so much for sharing that and really lifting up just how poignant the moment was. I know that, you know, people worldwide tuned in and were moved. The moment that arrests started happening, you know, so many people wanted to know how they could help, how they could support, they could donate. So many people shared the live streams, thousands, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands tuned in. I know that many from, you know, many of our parents and their generation who used to be fighting those same fights, you know, were really moved. I know that members of my family, this excitement was reignited in them, that young people were taking a stand for something that, you know, others may have not, may have thought never could happen like this. So it was a beautiful sight. It was a beautiful sight to see it lifted up in national media for this really strategic move to be seen and heard. And yeah, I just know how many people it really moved. And so maybe we could kind of pause and talk about that a little bit. I know that each of you, Nick, for example, I'd love to hear from you a little bit on like how you heard from people in your community about what this stand on July 3rd in the Chesapa meant to them. Because I think, you know, while we do want to talk about the charges, do lift up that this is a win for the movement, for organizing, that the sole purpose for taking this stand in the first place, we don't want that to get lost in the narrative too. That is still a fight. The fight for the Black Hills continues. The strength of this movement continues. So Nick, can you tell us a little bit more about like after July 3rd, what was it like in your community? What was some of the feedback that you got from elders and others that spoke to what this meant to them?
The people were fired up. The people were fired up after July 3rd. I think that I mean, I'm sure Nataanii and Krystal experienced this, but like, it made people feel proud. It made people feel good. It made, you know, just like when we were up there and the spirits embraced us for being up there. You know, our people embraced us too. And I think that especially the elders, that's what I noticed, especially the elders, especially the older people. And I think what they seen is, and I can't say I'm a younger person, I'm just younger than the elders, but is that they seen a new generation of young people that are willing to protect and stand up for the land. And I think that as these elders were getting older, it made them feel good in their heart. It made them feel like every battle that they fought wasn't for nothing, because the people were going to continue on those fights. And you know, just people coming up to you saying thank you, Wopila for what you did. And I think the other thing too is like even like little ones too. They were saying, you know. The people would introduce and say, "Hey, this is one of the land defenders, right?" And it was something powerful, because you think about that with the Wakaija and the kids. Well, they all of a sudden get to see their own people saying, "Hey, that's a land defender. I want to be like that. I want to be. I want to associate with something that my people are proud of." And I think that's a powerful thing for our people. I think the other thing that I realized is um, there's always more than meets the eye, you know, in every ceremony, and it's like that with every action too. Some people think that we just go out there and do an action, and that's it. But really, it's a ceremony, and commitments are made, and commitments are made in those moments, and relationships are built, and those moments catalyze us forward. And I think that the big thing that it meant amongst the people for so long is that the struggle for the Black Hills has been generational. It's been generation after generation, um, and I think that it reminded us who we are as a people, and what our duty is to protect our land and to stand up to the powers that be. And so for us to be able to stand in our indigeneity on our land in a very authentic way of who we are, but also in solidarity with a national movement that was happening in the country, with the movement for Black Lives, and be able to connect those struggles, I realized it helped a lot of our people start connecting some of those dots, and it put this issue back into the national conversation, because to us, if we're going to take down symbols of white supremacy and statues and these kinds of things, well, for indigenous people, well, we got to have a conversation about land back. And I think that that's part of what this also did, is it helped. The land back movement already existed before July 3rd, but what this did, it helped catalyze that movement. It helped amplify that movement. It helped bring it closer into the mainstream, more part of the conversation, because the land back movement is something that nobody controls and lives in the hearts and minds of indigenous people everywhere. Um, so those are the biggest things that were takeaway. I would say the last thing I would say about that is, I think that in the middle of COVID, in the middle of the pandemic, this provided some healing for the people. It provided something. It let them step away from what was happening in the community, and it gave them something to envision and be proud of, and be connected to. And so it provided healing in that way too. So I think it meant a lot of different things to people, and those are just different things that I heard people say when it would come up to me, whether it was in Porcupine or Pine Ridge or Rapid. I think that's the only places I went. um, but the that that's what I heard from people, and I think that, yeah, I think that's what it meant for people, and I think that it meant that the struggle was going to continue on, and that we had leadership that was willing to make sacrifices, but also we had people, elders, parents, children, youth, that all felt connected to one another through this, and so that was really powerful. And to me, I felt like a ceremony.
Definitely. And I'm thinking about how, while Indigenous people and our allies and supporters, how on one hand, they felt excitement, we also see the corollary to that, and that is that a lot of non-Indigenous people who are resistant to the history that's been buried for a really long time, that this is also really triggering for them. When they see these words back here, land back, it instills resistance, maybe fear, maybe resentment, maybe anger. And so there was also this corollary of backlash in the city of Rapid City, for sure, no doubt. And so the reality is we're in this era too of like white supremacy rearing its head in ways that it hasn't in a really, really long time. And so just the boldness of you all to show up on the ground that day, with that giant banner that says LandBack, knowing that, for a lot of people, they don't quite get it. They don't understand exactly what it means. There's fear involved in it with some people. You all really sparked something. And so just want to honor the sacrifice all of you made. It was a huge risk. And I know a lot of people don't want to take that risk because who wants to lose their freedom? We have families, we have lives, and so it's a scary thing. And so I think that you all made that risk, and now we're here, really shows that it's worth it. It's worth it, and everybody takes risks and puts themselves on the line in different ways. Everyone shows up in their communities in different ways, but the ways that you all did, that sacrifice is really appreciated. And this is one small victory in a line of, a huge victory. Don't want to downplay it, but there are many more, and the fight continues. And we'll talk about that a little later in the conversation, where we talk about the landscape of LandBack moving forward and what it means. But now I want to talk a little bit more about the competing narratives that are out right now, because even as we made this announcement about the charges being dropped, being a victory for the movement, being a result of all the pressure that we put on. This wouldn't have happened if we just turned a blind eye. This wouldn't have happened if all those calls weren't made, if all those petitions weren't signed, if the media attention didn't happen, if the social media shares didn't happen. Some people like to downplay that stuff, but the people power really mattered here. But getting back to those competing narratives, I think as Indigenous people, and for those deeply involved in this organizing and liberation work, we're no stranger to fighting false narratives or skewed narratives. So let's talk about what those competing narratives are right now in relation to these charges being dropped. What is the other side saying? What are they trying to say? And what is the truth according to us? What is our narrative? So Nick, we'll start with you. We'll go back to you, and then we'll go around the table here. Tell us about what some of these competing narratives are around the charges being dropped.
Well, I don't know if I want to use my airtime for their narratives, but I'll keep it short. Because I want to hear what Nataanii and Krystal have to say on this. I think, in short, this whole, politically motivated charges is always a battle over the narrative. That's about what it is. There is no legal grounds for any of these charges. They're gonna say these Indigenous people are criminals. They participated and broke the law on July 3rd, and because of that, we're gonna have compassion for them, and we're gonna give them this diversion program as a way out. And that's kind of their narrative. Let's talk about the reality. The reality is that we really did build collective power. We back them into the corner. The whole power dynamic shifted and changed, and the narrative that they were pushing got drowned out. The villains became Kristi Noem, Sheriff Tome, the prosecutor, and many of the land defenders. We became the heroes and the victors of this work, and the power of the people are the ones who define that, not the government, not the law, not the law enforcement, not the prosecutors. And we changed that narrative. And so I think they're over here talking about a diversion program when the reality is, let's get real. It is a couple hours of community service for work that we would already be doing in the community anyway. And it was a political way out for them. It was a political way out for them, and it was a win for us. And they basically were like, I don't know, when you punk out people and they're like, man, I ain't having this no more. This needs to go away. That's what happened. That's the truth. And I think that often, like us as Indigenous people, they're always trying to use the system against us all the time, right? They want us to be on the defense. They want us to be stepping back. But in this situation, we stepped up, and then they came to our doorstep and said, we want out. And it was like, okay, well, let's figure out what that looks like for you, and we'll go from there. So it was a different it was a different political dynamic. And of course, all the media are talking about, well, are these charges officially dropped after this diversion program or before? And I'm like, blah, blah, blah. The prosecutor knows exactly what the deal is, and he knows the charges are being dropped, and he knows that we won't even be on probation past 3 months from now. That's the damn truth. So, anyway, yeah, those are the things I would say. And we're coming out stronger. We're coming out with stronger relationships. We're coming out with catalyzing our movement forward, and we're coming out swinging for our land back. I mean, that's the narrative that we're pushing.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. So, Krystal, break it down for us. I know that you've spoken. You're a well-known and respected spokesperson, and since this has happened, you've spoken about LandBack. You've spoken about this event. What is the big truths for you? What are these competing narratives, and what's the real?
Man, I mean, I think Nick said it, but I think when it comes to LandBack, like the biggest competing narrative that I run into is we ain't coming for your houses. No one's coming for your private property, and I think like that's a big thing that people get hung up on when they hear LandBack, and I think that feeds into the fear, and then that feeds into the narratives that we're seeing play out, right? And like the misinformation that's being put out there. But also just want to highlight the fact that misinformation is very much a part in a step in the cycle of oppression, right? So like thinking about the cycle of oppression, like misinformation leads to mistreatment, right? And mistreatment leads to like institutionalization of policies and practices that are then put into law and put into practice. And then that leads to the internalized oppression that we feel as targeted peoples, right? That also leads into the internalized superiority that folks feel over us. And so like being very clear about our narrative and being very clear about what we are saying is very important, because that is like where it starts at. And so I think like right now, it's exactly what Nick says in terms of like, I don't want to give power to any counter narratives. Like, I mean, I'm tracking in terms of that, but like, honestly, like we've built a lot of power here, and we've built a lot of deep relationships, and we're shifting the way that things are being done right now. And that's what the story is. And that's what the focus should be on, is what we are doing here collectively, not just within Indian Collective, but with all of our deep relationships that span across grassroots communities, organizers, across movements, and globally. I mean, we're in deep conversations with our relatives in Palestine, our relatives in Central, South America, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Guam, like, just thinking about all of these places where people are struggling to just be in simple relationship with the land. And that's the narrative. That's the story, is that we're building power with folks like that. And we're not paying attention and giving too much energy to these other counter narratives. But I do think it's important to state, like I said earlier, that, we're not coming for individual houses. We're not coming for private property like that, but we are coming for public lands, and we are coming to reclaim our relationship to those lands. But yeah, I just wanted to add that little piece of how important that these narratives are.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks so much, Krystal. So sorry, Nataanii, you got to follow up these two, but I know you got a lot here too. What is the truth to you? I know that you're well aware of all these narratives that throughout your life, throughout your legacy, your family legacy, that you have been aware of. So what is the truth to you in this moment, in this victory?
Well, I'm coming for private land, personally. I'm just kidding. So watch out. No, but for me, this is it's deeply rooted. I come from a family that's deeply embedded in movement and have been since the 70s and even before. And realizing what's all happening right now is amazing. So many fights people face on so many different fronts. Land defending. There's fights within our own communities that are very hard and very challenging within our own communities as well. And then there's bigger narratives to get out there, on different scales. I'm a hip hop artist, uh, and I'm getting into designing as well, designing clothes. So that's kind of where I'm at with a lot of this right now. I've frontlined for a while now, and it can be very, very challenging, very damaging to yourself, to your spirit, and right now I'm in a space of like gathering myself, gathering my medicine back up, making sure I'm all right to like move mentally. I'm okay, and I'm really into big like mental health right now for our own people, for our men too, specifically. Addressing things in my music, addressing things on other levels that we go through as young men in the 21st century, and ways we can become better, ways we can become more um, uh, in balance with each other. Uh, so that's where I'm at with this. I'm trying to get into spaces with my music, you know, um, where natives aren't usually at, where we're overlooked. Our population is so small in America compared to somewhere like Canada. You know what I'm saying? And it's hard to get into these bigger spaces, these more mainstream spaces, whether that be with clothing or with music or movies or just in the arts in general. So showing who we are in the 21st century is very important to me, and changing that narrative as well. Um, but I come from Russell Means, so he's always in the back of my head. Like he would say things to me like repetitively. He's in my head repetitively all the time. And reclaiming the Chesapa is number one on my list. And just like Krystal said, public lands, that should be the first thing we reclaim. And shouts out to Indian Collective and to a lot of other people out there doing a lot of work for reclamation. Um, just the other day, uh, there was a community led welcoming back the thunder, the Wakina Oyate at Hihan Chaga, and that right there in itself is reclamation. Something that big. I know over the years, like individuals would do it, certain Tioshpayes would do it, certain Tiwahes would do it, certain little groups here and there will go and do it. Now it's becoming something bigger, and it's using social media, it's using all this to tell everybody like, hey, let's gather here, let's make our presence known in the hills again, and go pray. That in itself is an action, you know, and it's little things like that that are big, huge, just to go pray in the hills, just to go pick your medicines. Um, just this past winter, we went and picked chinchasha, and I learned a song that you're supposed to sing when you pick it. And that's these are things that we're relearning and coming back to us, and it's just beautiful, man. All of this is just beautiful, and it's hard work too. It's really hard work. There's frontliners out there that do this for nothing, and they're racked up in charges and they're still pushing forward. So just want to give a big shout out to all the frontliners out there, all the people behind the scenes, all the people writing grants, all the people making it happen. You know what I'm saying? It's we're all needed on every single front. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I love that. I love how you acknowledge the importance of that ceremony happening there too, and that's why we do this work in the first place. Is for that reason. Those lands mean something. It's not just physical land, obviously. It's ancestral, it's generational, it's ceremony, it's spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks so much, Nataanii. So we're going to take a quick break, everyone. Firstly, just want to acknowledge, or express gratitude for joining us and being here up to this point. in this very special conversation on NDN Live, so far we've talked a little bit about those charges, but when we come back, we'll be talking a bit more about the LandBack campaign, where things are at now, where the fight for the Black Hills currently stands, and then we'll also kind of pan out and talk about this bigger movement of movements. So just a quick 6-minute break here, and on this break, we're going to stream NDN Collective short film Kesapa, a LandBack film produced by Oglala Lakota filmmaker Willie White, who is also creative producer here at NDN. And this 5-minute short film tells the story of what happened on that day from an unapologetic Indigenous lens. It's a beautiful film. 5 minutes can really, the 5 minutes of this show produced by Willie with all the land defenders there, like it's really beautiful and poignant. So please stick around for that during the break. And then also we'll be showing a short ad for the Defend Blanket, which is a creative collaboration between NDN Collective, 8th Generation, the fastest growing Native business in the US, and Nawa and Maya artist Votan. And we debuted this blanket on International Women's Day. So check that out as well. And then we'll meet you back here in about 6 minutes. Thanks, everyone.
To our relatives of Bennington County, do you hear us inside of there? Our relatives inside of Bennington County, we wanted to remind you that you're not forgotten, that we love you, that we remember you, that we know that you're in there as a result of an unjust system. And us, we came together, your relatives, to stand with you as we stand against the President of the United States, as we fight for our land. And we remember you, and we'll make prayers for you. So we're here to stand with everybody throughout this nation to call out white supremacy, to call out an end to systematic racism and oppression of our communities and our people. Tomorrow, the President of the United States will be coming to the heart of the Ashanti Shakoi, and he's not welcome here. And we're here to send a message that we want Mount Rushmore closed and the return of that land back to Indigenous people. So we're here in solidarity and remembering that all throughout the system of injustice and white supremacy, you'll find Indigenous people. And we also want to remind that as we do this work, we're standing in solidarity with our Black brothers and sisters against this racist system of oppression. We have fought hard and long time to protect our land, and will not continue to stand for our land to be stolen from us and desecrated. So we stand at this time, at this moment in this history, and we continue on a struggle that our ancestors who have come before have fought for. Whose land? Our land! Whose land? Our land!
Your voice will not be silenced. We will walk Front Truck tomorrow. We say enough. We'll take back this stolen land, one rock at a time. If it's starting with Mount Rushmore, and it's not gonna end. It will never end as long as we have breath in our lungs, as long as we have blood in our bodies. We will keep marching. We will keep shouting. We will keep protesting. No, protecting. Because this is our land, and we're gonna take it back, and there's nothing they can do about it.
Our common enemy is white supremacy and systematic racism. We've seen what happened to our Black brothers and sisters. We know that the movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter stands with us as Indigenous people as we collectively fight for our liberation, for the collective movement for our people. And our goal is not just to resist. Our goal is to radically transform this country so that it works for everybody.
This is sacred land. This is Lakota land. This is my land. I can stand right here.
The aggression today was come out from you guys.
We want our land back.
We ain't going nowhere. Got it. This is our land. It's been our land for thousands of years.
To the Nataanii County Sheriff's Department, to the Highway Patrol, this is a warning to each and every one of you. You are unlawfully on our land without consent of our tribal leaders, in violation of our treaties. You have an opportunity now that we're giving you to stand down and vacate our land. Whose land? Our land! Whose land? Our land!
This is the land of the Osheti Shakoi. And we're prepared to stand our ground. Today has been a proud day to be Lakota. Today has been a proud day to be indigenous. We shut down Mount Rushmore for 3 hours. And we did it in a good way. We felt that power from our ancestors. So Wopula Tonka Achicha Apolo to each and every one of you. Hands behind your back! Hands behind your back! Hands behind your back! I'm not doing it. For our people, for our Black Hills, right there, here, for the Osheti Shakoi.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. Hope you enjoyed those 2 videos. The break was much appreciated on our end. Everybody got to stretch a little bit. But coming back, we're going to continue some really good conversation here, talking not just about the charges and what this means, this era of movements we're in, but we're going to start out by talking about the LandBack campaign, and then also this notion of LandBack. What does it mean? Krystal talked about it, Nick, Nataanii, and each kind of sharing a different perspective on it. And Nick and Krystal both mentioned that, this LandBack movement is something that exists, whether it was called a LandBack movement or whether the name existed or the hashtag existed or the memes existed, coming from many of our relatives north of the medicine line to carrying forth this message. All of our ancestors have been fighting for our land since it was being threatened, since our connection to our land was threatened, starting in 1492. And so the meaning of this has deep, deep roots for all of us here. And so to ground us in the second segment of this conversation, we thought it'd be a good idea for all of the panelists here to go around and have an opportunity to define what that means to you when you see that phrase, when you hear, of LandBack actions taking place across, across Turtle Island, across the world, for Indigenous peoples fighting for their land in different places. What does this mean to you? And feel free to break it down in all the ways. So we'll kick it off here with Krystal, the director of the LandBack campaign. So ground us in, what does LandBack mean to you?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I mean, that's the number one question I get being the director of the LandBack campaign. Everyone asks me that, and I think that it's very literal for me. Is I literally mean like the reclamation of land and us reclaiming land, but also specifically looking at it as our relationship and our responsibilities to the land, in our original instructions that were placed in us as caretakers to the land. In it's the reclamation of our language that literally comes from the land, in the sounds that we hear from the land. It's the reclamation of our ceremonies and our songs that tell us we are the land. It's the reclamation of our entire culture that is built around that relationship. It's the reclamation of all of the systems, right? Like our food systems, like harvesting medicines and hunting and gardening. It's the housing systems that we have. It's the kinship systems and relationships that we have to each other and our families in other nations. It's education systems that we have. It's the healthcare and our ability to heal and to take care of ourselves based on our knowledge from the land. It's our governing systems, right? And so even looking at dismantling these systems that don't work on our benefit and for our on our behalf, in replacing them with systems that do work for us, in governing systems that we've had since time immemorial. But for me, that's what it is. It's not a colonial ownership of this land. It's the relationship that we have it, and it's the reclamation of everything that was stolen from us when we were forcefully removed from these lands. But yeah, that's the way I view LandBack and the way that I've been defining it for myself and how I move.
Thank you, Krystal. That's beautiful. Nataanii, what does LandBack mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything Krystal just said. Basically the same thing, man. How can I top that? It's just being able to be ready, to always be ready, you know. You know, I know for myself, I have a group of very close friends that we maneuver, you know, in ways that that help a lot on the front lines, and it's educating myself on different strategies on who the enemy is, right? Who's the enemy? The enemy right now is the system. The enemy right now is the police. I'll say it. You know what I'm saying? Is the system? They're a part of the system. It's the government. It's this government. It's the IRA mind state. It's these crooked laws and these politicians. So it's educating myself on who they are and what they are and how I can get in there. You know what I'm saying? And I don't have resources. I don't have an army. I don't have, you know, all these, you know, I don't have a violent mentality. I don't think, you know, death should be the only way like the U.S. government thinks. But, you know, it's when you educate yourself on who the enemy is, then you can start to work around them and work in ways that it's. I think Manuelito said it. He's a Navajo chief when he was before he died. He said, you know, that we should learn the education of the white man, so we can come back and help our people. And I always thought about that. People think of it as, I think, you know, we should just learn it, right, and fall into the system of capitalism and, you know, the American dream. But the way I see it is that learn it and then use it against them. So that's one reason why I love being a hip hop artist, is that I can take this language that I was forced to know before my own and use it against them. You know what I'm saying? If I'm gonna speak this language, I'm gonna do it for a reason, and get in spaces. You know, I've spoken at the UN. I've in Geneva, Switzerland. I've been on tour across all over the world multiple times. You know, I've been in communities with young kids and taught them how to record themselves. And LandBack is pride. It's it's spirit. Just like how I looked up to those older men and women that would throw down at Columbus Day in Denver, Colorado in the 90s or in early 2000s, or, you know what I'm saying? The way I looked at these older aimsters that are now gone into the next world, when they would all stand together, and I would just look at them and they just, you know, laughing and strong, man. And, you know, that's the feeling I want people to, all of our people to have, you know. So it's me LandBack is also me reaching into places of our own people where they don't feel that, where I can give them a little bit of hope and help them see what's what's so good about being who we are. And there's a lot of hurt out there in our communities and a lot of pain and suffering. So, it's a broad spectrum of things. And I know I'm going off, but um, that's just where I'm at with it. There's a lot of hurt right now. So finding healing for myself and then for my friends that don't feel that pride and make them feel it, that is bringing it back. That's LandBack to me. That's that's important to me. Is to get my homies that don't give no f's about none of this, to get them to care. Shoot, that would be huge. We need warriors. We need conscious warriors. We need people that understand, and we need men that are willing to go that extra mile and remember what it's like to be who our ancestors were in a small little bitty way. You know, uh, so that's where I'm at with it. That's what I think of it, and I'm very focused in on that. I think so.
It's beautiful.
Oh, and it's also an album that we have coming out, LandBack, the album. So I just want to plug that. Shout out NDN Collective, myself, Antone Edwards. We headed up a project um, that we recorded in Phoenix, and it has amazing artists on it. It has, a wide variety of Lakotas, Dakotas. It has Bears. He's from Taos Pueblo, and then we have Olivia Comachi, who's from Comanche Nation in Oklahoma, and we just have a lot of artists on there that really made a really really dope album. And in 2 weeks time, we came together and we vibed the right way, and we made a really good album. So just want to let everybody know that's watching, that will be coming out hopefully next month. I'm setting it hopefully by next month. We're waiting on the masters to come back, so there's been some delays there. So just letting you guys know.
Love that, Nataanii. Speaking from that deep, real place, I hear, LandBack is joy. I heard you say LandBack is hope. LandBack is healing. And so I just love how you broke that down. That was powerful. All right, Nick, you got to follow that up. What does LandBack mean to you? You put your life on the line, your freedom on the line for this idea, this notion. So why'd you do that? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I could easily say whatever Nataanii and Krystal said too. I could say that too. But I think, let's keep it simple. To Indian people everywhere, when somebody says LandBack, the first time I heard it, I was like, hell yeah. I was like, because you know what that shit meant? It meant like, when they took our land, like, it impacted everything in our lives. It impacted all aspects of our lives. And so all of a sudden, LandBack meant all of these different things. And it actually means resistance. It actually means power. It means liberation. And I think that LandBack is our modern indigenous liberation movement. It is the future. And that's part of what makes this so powerful in this whole situation. So to me, and shout out to my little brother Mark that says this every once in a while, but he used to challenge and say, who's to say that the best days of the Lakota are actually behind us when they actually could be in front of us? And I always thought about that because we tend to hold on to the past. In fact, we glorify the past. We live in the past half the time, because to us in a mind frame, there was a time when things were good, and then they took the land, and then things were bad. And so to me, when I think about LandBack, I think about the future. And I think about what the future lies. And I got mad visions about what land back means for our future. The land back is the war cry. Land back is the war cry for the future of our people. Because if we get the land, if we get the land back, we can rebuild our economies. We can rebuild our societies. We can rebuild our languages. We can rebuild many of the things that were taken from us from colonization and oppression. And through the process of that, our people will be able to have healing, and our people will be able to have a future, and our young people will be able to have a future that they can see themselves in. That they can see a future that they can see themselves in, that they identify with, that's part of who they are. And so I think when I think about land back, I think about possibilities. I think about what is the possibilities. I think about radically imagining the future of our nations and what that can look like. I think about all of the BS colonial maps that we have that sit there and divide our people when we don't need, when we actually should be working towards liberation. So I think about those things, and I think about, when I think about land back, I think about the future of indigenous people everywhere, but I also think about how we are in relationship with all people throughout Mother Earth, and how we are reestablishing those relationships, because the people and land back and liberation can unite our people together and heal our relationships, instead of continue to spew hate into the world, instead of continue to divide and conquer us. So to me, those are just like the footnotes of what I think land back is. But the big picture to me is I believe land back is the war cry for the future liberation of our people.
Awesome. Appreciate that. Calling in philosopher Mark, and just really appreciate all of your shares. And just as you said, Nick, like, this conversation can literally go on and on. This is so complex and rich. For folks tuning in, we always love hearing from you. Maybe you could let us know in the chat, what resonated with you here that Nick and Nataanii and Krystal all shared, and what does land back mean to you? It's such a vast and complex question. And what I'll share a little bit too. So as a member of the NDN collective team, as someone who leads our communications and narrative change work, the work that we do is to shift that narrative and recognizing that there are always these competing narratives. And to me, like, man, everything that each of you said just really resonated deep. And I was really, calling up images and stories and experiences, or my own family, from my own ancestry, my own history. We've fought for that connection to lands that were literally blocked from our access, fenced off, fences around areas where my family used to go and access springs to go bathe in and pray, hot springs, lands where we would see, sacred buttes that we would drive, I remember driving with my dad past or through these farmlands right near the Snake River and the ancestral homelands of the Shoshone and Paiute people. And, now these lands are occupied by farmers who have that best land right by the river. But they also have lands, comprised in their property that are sacred ceremonial lands to us. And I remember driving by as a young girl and my dad pointing out those buttes and saying, that's a sacred place up there. There used to be ceremonies up there, and point out, all these different important landmarks. And just as a little girl and, even getting older, like really feeling and deeply experiencing that pain of like seeing what was ripped from you right there and seeing it in a fence. So land back to me is also, the deep untangling and revealing of colonialism, and how colonialism throughout history ripped so many people from this deep and important and necessary relationship to the land that we see everybody trying to re-access right now. It was a disconnection that happened going back to, even the tribal roots that Europeans, descendants of settlers, had in Europe. They once had that connection to land too. And so there's a place for everybody in this land back movement. But as we speak of it as Indigenous people, as people who have been disconnected from our land and disenfranchised and had our land under attack, our way of life under attack, because they wanted our land starting in 1492. It's centuries of untangling colonialism and seeing how that still happens. We're not in this post-colonial era. Lands are still under attack. We're still fighting for that reconnection. And so, just I don't want to go off too much here either, but just to say I really appreciate everything that each of you shared, and just acknowledge that, you know, there's so much beauty in this question and this conversation, and it's a question that we'll continue to unpack and discuss. But from there, I would love to shift back to Krystal, our director of the LandBack campaign, who is responsible at NDN Collective for guiding and leading this beautiful work. So Krystal, I'd love it if you could share a bit more about, you know, where the LandBack campaign is as it relates to NDN Collective and as it ties back to this fight in the Black Hills. Where does that fight currently stand, and what are some other goals and priorities of the LandBack campaign at NDN Collective?
Thanks, Sarah. Man, there's so much to share. Like, in the matter of 8 to 9 months that the LandBack campaign has existed, I mean, there has just been so much powerful work happening because of our relationships, right? But I want to start and just like highlight some things that I've heard from like Nick in terms of like LandBack is something that like lives in the hearts and the minds of all Indigenous peoples, right? And I think like that narrative is like a meta narrative that we you know, like not, I don't know, I guess like compared to like Black Lives Matter, right? In terms of like all the organizing and the movement and the grassroots organizers and the front lines and the organizations and everything that goes into pushing that narrative forward and pushing the work forward, right? And that's the movement, it's people, right? And the power of people and individuals and organizations and grassroots groups and young people and our elders and ceremonial people and everyone out there that's like fighting for this. And that comprises the movement, and that belongs to nobody. And I think that with the LandBack campaign, you know, we definitely felt everything after July 3rd in terms of sitting with our elders and people in our communities coming up to us and telling us that they had given up on reclaiming the Black Hills, and they had given up on different struggles, in that what happened on July 3rd gave them hope, just the same way Nataanii talked about and the same way Nick talked about. Is like it gave them hope for that, to actually be able to see the Black Hills come back into our care, and that in itself was really powerful. And I think that was also a driving force that pushed for the campaign, right? And so the campaign, you know, it manifested through NDN Collective, and through NDN Collective, the LandBack campaign exists, you know, for several things. But one, first and foremost, is to reclaim the Black Hills, right? Starting with public lands in the Black Hills, and really reviving that fight and stepping into that fight, which is a generational fight that people have been fighting for since long before myself, and that our people have been fighting for. And so there's that. And then we're demanding the closure of Mount Rushmore, this shrine of white supremacy that exists in the heart of our sacred lands. And so those are two goals that we have currently, that we're currently moving on. Then the other side of the campaign is really around movement support. So really looking at and seeing that there is a need for movement infrastructure and movement support across Turtle Island, and especially around LandBack organizing. So those grassroots groups and those communities and folks that are organizing very specifically to reclaim relationship to land. And so we basically developed out our campaign to support that work and to help build infrastructure around that. And we have 3 goals that we work for. Well, 4 goals. The first is to amplify and uplift those voices of folks on those front lines and that are doing that work and fighting. The other is to resource them and to really look at that there's a need for resources in these communities to be able to support the work, just as Nataanii named, that there's folks that are out there that still have all of these fines, that are still organizing, that have gone to jail multiple times, that don't have income and are still fighting. And so really looking at how do we support folks. The other is really looking at politicizing. And so understanding that there is a need for political education and political analysis, both internally with ourselves, but also externally to bring our folks with us and to really get on the same page with some of these conversations. The last is to connect. And so really looking at connecting LandBack organizing that's happening globally, realistically. So we aim to connect not just in Indian country, but also to connect across movements. And I think that we do that by having 4 demands, right? So the LandBack campaign's demands are dismantle white supremacy in all of the institutions that continue to embody white supremacy and continue to keep us separated from our lands. The other is to defund white supremacy and the mechanisms that continue to enforce keeping Indigenous folks from land. And those are the enforcing mechanisms are like the U.S. military, the police, ICE, Border Patrol, and even park rangers. You know, we've all heard these stories of park rangers keeping folks from their lands. And so then the third demand is around consent. So really moving us from an era of, so-called meaningful consultation to an era of consent, that decisions are not made about us, our bodies, and our relationship to land and water without our consent. And I think with the confirming of the confirmation of the new Madam Secretary Holland, that is something that is not aspirational, but is actually possible. And then the last demand is around just simply returning Indigenous lands to Indigenous hands. And so I think that those are the big pieces around our LandBack campaign. It's pretty massive, and I know that a lot of that is really conceptual, but we do have a lot of fronts that we're supporting right now. Right now there's Oak Flat and, our Apache relatives down south who are fighting to keep relationship with some of their sacred lands down there that was slipped into a bill and passed at the last minute and given away to Rio Tinto, one of the world's largest mining companies. And so really supporting communities like that and calling attention and uplifting their voices and what they need, amplifying that, resourcing them, and then supporting and connecting them to organizing that's happening. I also want to add in just a little bit about priorities too, because we're connecting not just across Indian country, but we're connecting across movements. And we're very intentional about why we're connecting across movements, because we believe in one of our principles is we don't win without each other. We don't win these fights without having really deep relationships with other targeted and oppressed folks globally. And so we operate from the analysis that, if we go back to the doctrine of discovery, which was the religious legal mechanism that allowed for our lands to be claimed on behalf of a kingdom, then it was the U.S. military that started to enforce that and to remove us from our lands. In that committed massacre after massacre and attempted genocide on us to get access to our lands, right? And so we have to acknowledge that colonialism and militarism went hand in hand, and militarism was the enforcing mechanism of that. And that template is now being used and taken to go overseas and used as U.S. imperialism to get access to lands from Indigenous folks that are across the seas. And so really looking at the connection, and from there introduce patriarchy and capitalism and corporatism and all of the different isms that we're all battling. And so for us, it's really important that we are connecting across movements and that we're deepening those relationships so that when we go to introduce LandBack legislation at some point, that we have allies, we have relatives that will go to bat for us and show up to push these things through. But those are kind of the big points, the big highlights of what's going on currently within the LandBack campaign. I know it's massive and it's very conceptual right now, but we're grinding hard every day. And just also want to add the spiritual alignment of that is that this work would be at least 4 times more difficult if it wasn't spiritually guided, and if things weren't just like placed in front of us on our journey and on our path with this. So really just want to acknowledge that piece too.
Yeah, thanks, Krystal. And for folks listening, you can learn more about the LandBack campaign at landback.org. That is the LandBack website, and we'll be making some updates to that in the coming weeks where we roll out a little bit more of the most recent work of the LandBack campaign. So from here, I want us to kind of pan out, and Krystal, you kind of mentioned like the importance of connecting to other movements right now, and 2020 was a big year where we saw this emergence of like fight against white supremacy, this emergence of intersecting movements for justice. And so panning out to look at that landscape of where we're at in this era of movements locally and nationally. Nick, I'd love it if you could share with us some of your own personal insight on the real opportunities of this moment. I think, we're obviously restricted in this time of pandemic, but yet we're making moves. Like things are happening. People are still organizing. Like there's so much taking place. And so there's this momentum. You as a lifelong organizer who's also been, on those front lines since you were a little kid, what are the opportunities in this moment right now that, we should be capitalizing on, for lack of a better word? I need a better word than that. But yeah, what are the opportunities here? What is your advice as a seasoned organizer?
Jeez, really built me up on that one. Well, no, I'll say this: social change and radical change is constant, so it's always happening, it's always going. But there is moments in history where it happens rapidly, where there's a convergence of movements and the right energy, and we're in one of those moments. We're in one of those cycles where there is the possibility for rapid change, and that's the times that we are living in. And when we are in those times of rapid change, like the times that we're in, you see the convergence of movements, like you're starting to see with LandBack, with the movement for Black Lives Matter, the immigrant rights movement, the Asian and Pacific Islander movement. You start to see people bind together, because when things get hard, human beings bind together. And even in Lakota, in Lakota, we have the Uipi ceremony, and we always say whenever that the ceremony is about binding our prayers together. It's about binding things together. And I think that in these moments of radical change, when we have the opportunity to bind our energy together, we can create, radical change. And what happens in these moments, which I believe that we're in, is we start tearing down silos. We stop having, one issue focused area, but we focus on bigger narratives that tear down the silos that keep us separated, because everything is interrelated and interlocked, and that's why in every indigenous language in the world there's a word for Midakuyase, or that we're all related, or that all things are connected. I haven't found an indigenous language in the world that doesn't say that yet. So that's lessons, right? Those languages are thousands and thousands of years old. There's a reason they acknowledge those interconnectedness of things. So I think as we sit back here and we're recognizing that we're in one of these moments, that the representation in the government, not to say the government is solving and has the ability to solve all the problems, but the representation that exists in the government is because we put them there, and we allowed them to be there, and we fought for them to be there. And so it's important that we keep them accountable to us, and that the people that are in these federal agencies and in the halls of Congress and the Senate and the White House continue to that we hold them accountable, and that we use our movements and our collective power and our movements to keep them accountable to us as we fight for systematic change. So I see those convergences happening. I think that there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity to deal with our shit as a movement, so that we can actually continue to build with one another. We can continue to address things like anti-blackness in the indigenous peoples movement. We can continue to address things like erasure politics of indigenous people that exist in all these other movements. We can start to, look at the full definition of what indigeneity means. We have an opportunity to do that. We're the creators, us collectively, right now, of those conversations, and those conversations are catalytic. Those conversations will lead to liberation of land and people and a pathway to the future, a pathway that looks way better than the pathway that we've walked on, or the road that we've walked on for the past 150, 200 years, and so or 500 years, I guess. And so I think that there's a immense opportunity to lean in, but we have to recognize that it's not just going to be policy wins that get us there, and it's not just going to be that we have to have policy wins, that we have to build permanent movement infrastructure, because movements are the things that make the world run, and it's the thing that government becomes accountable to, and that if we work towards collective healing and working through our baggage and making long-term commitments to this work, we're going to end up with relationships that have the ability to radically transform the future and keep us working on ourselves. So yeah, I think those are though that's the opportunity that lies in front of us in this historic moment. And I will say that when we look back 50 years from now, we will talk about the year 2020. We will talk about the year 2021. We will talk about the year 2022, 23, and 24. And those will be historic years. And so for us to recognize that we're in one of those arcs of not just radical change, but rapid change, we're going to be able to get a lot of stuff done for a lot of communities and a lot of people, and also for the land itself. Because we need to stop thinking about the land as some kind of thing that we're disconnected from, and it's about restoring the land to also be liberated on its own, in its own right, and to reclaim its own power to rejuvenate itself and take care of itself too.
Yeah, it's strong, and even shifting into a new season, into spring, where much parts of the northern hemisphere are coming back to life. I know that a lot of our people, indigenous people and non-indigenous people, that we're all children of this earth, really excited about this season and getting back out onto the land for our harvesting seasons, and so that's really exciting. So thanks so much for speaking to those opportunities, Nick. And I totally agree. We're in the thick of this moment, and we're all so blessed to be a part of it. As Indigenous people today, this is definitely a critical, important time. This is our time. So glad to be here with both of you, Nick and Krystal, to hear from your experience, your deep wisdom, to hear from people who are always out there leading with courage. And so much appreciation for joining us on this conversation today. So some of you may have noticed that Nataanii dropped off. He had some other commitments that he had to go tend to, but much appreciation to Nataanii for joining us as well. We're going to go ahead and close out quickly here with one more question. Not so much a question, but an opportunity for you, Nick and Krystal, to share any last words and kind of bring us home back to why we're here in the first place. And that's to acknowledge the victory in this moment, acknowledge all of the time and effort and energy and sacrifice and support that went into this moment, so that we can be here and celebrate victory and talk about the path ahead, talk about opportunities, and not be worrying about your freedom. So starting with Krystal, maybe we can, or if you could just share any last words, could be acknowledgments, thank yous, gratitudes, calls to action, connecting us back to these charges and this ongoing fight.
Yeah, it's such a broad thing. There's so many thoughts. I think when Nick talked about just now, when he talked about accountability, some of my final thoughts are really, not only are we holding folks accountable out there for changes that we want to see and that we're demanding, but also I think accountability is like accountability to our peoples, to our communities. And I kind of want to just like bring that back into this conversation in terms of just like having gratitude for everyone that showed up for us through this whole journey and this whole process over the course of the last 9 months, till this day that the charges are actually being dropped now. And just really want to also say that, like my words like aren't necessarily my own words. Like they're a compilation in this, it's the bringing together of all of the teachings of people that have invested in me over the years, of mentors and like spiritual leaders and my parents and my siblings in my community, and people like Nick and yourself, Sarah, and others that I get to work with. And it's the bringing together of all of that. And I just also want to acknowledge that and just like name that that's what this work is for, right? And then also want to just think about like who we're accountable to, and that's who we're accountable to. We're accountable to these people that have invested in us over this time and have created us as as organizers and taught us how to be organizers. And I think that speaks to the power of not only LandBack, but of what we are capable as Native people, as Indigenous people, as people of this land. And so I don't know. So I just kind of wanted to bring it back to that, but also, thank people for all of those that prayed for us and that offered their support and words of encouragement. I went through a bank drive-through here in my community, and a young woman in there said, she was really shocked to see me. And she said, she's like, "Oh my God, you're my hero." And it really took me back because it just made me really think about like the young people in our community and how what we are doing has that impact in kind of circling back to some of the things Nick said earlier in terms of creating a world that our young people want to live in. I'm a longtime youth organizer as well. And that's like my heart lies there often. And so I think creating a world where our young people want to live, where they choose and actively want to be in, is really important and something that like I take seriously whenever I do this work. And I know Nataanii and Nick do as well. And it's really important that we start to think about how we're incorporating young people into our campaigns, and just want to name that as a way to hold myself accountable as well. And then also, I call on everyone to champion LandBack and to really carry this narrative and carry those demands that I listed out and carry the demand of LandBack out there. And, especially call on folks to take action, to organize, to reclaim land, occupy it, rename it, land trust, like create a land trust around it, create access roads, designate our sacred sites, reclaim co-management if it's a step in the direction of reclaiming that land as for ourselves. And so I really call on people to take action and to do those things, whether you're an artist like Nataanii and you carry that message forward in your music, in your voice, or whether that you're a poet, or or whether you are a videographer and create beautiful pieces such as the Hesapa video like Willie, whatever it is, do that work. And just know that like we support you and that we'll do everything we can to support you. And also for our white allies, to help petition and like push forward LandBack and help remove the fear. Have those conversations with your relatives to remove that fear that exists around Indigenous peoples getting land back and reclaiming that relationship. And so those are, some final pieces. And like last, but obviously not least, is like landback.org. We have petitions up to like close Mount Rushmore and to reclaim Black Hills. Sign the petitions, continue to support that way, sign up for the updates, and just continue organizing, continue showing up and doing the work. And we'll keep you updated and apprised on all of the Indian Collective social media platforms as well.
Thanks, Krystal. So Nick, closing thoughts, calls to action, gratitudes.
Give us our land back. Join us in getting our land back. Donate to the movement of getting land back. Support land back efforts in your community. If there's not one, start one. Um, those are all, obviously basic things. So like plus to everything that Krystal said, because she repped it pretty hard about all the things that we can do, of calls to action. And I wanted to say something in closing here about these charges, and I said this a couple times. Like, it feels messed up when the government comes after you. It feels messed up when the government comes after you. But I'll say this: I ain't never felt alone the entire time that this struggle was going on, ever. I didn't feel alone, and I didn't feel isolated. And it's because people all across this country showed up to support all of us. And that was real. I mean, the people, it was funny because everybody that any one of us had ever ran into before threw down. I running in, Sister Morgan Dixon. Morgan Dixon is one of the founders of a badass organization called Girl Trek. And Girl Trek, their whole mission, right, is like, they were inspired by the civil rights movement, but their whole organization is to get, 1 million Black women walking in the streets. And that if you can get 1 million Black women walking in the streets, you can create massive change. And it has contributed to one of the biggest health movements in the country. But Morgan, Sister Morgan, when she found out I was in jail, man, she had the whole Girl Trek network calling Pennington County, and after it was all over and I got out of jail, Morgan was like, "Man, you should have heard these." You should have heard these fools at Pennington County Jail when all of a sudden hundreds of Black women, angry Black women, were calling the Pennington County Sheriff's Department and the courthouse, and she was like, I even threatened them too. I was like, well, these are just phone calls. What if there's a couple thousand of us speed walking down Main Street in Rapid City? And so just all these different stories of like how different parts of this massive movement like showed up for us, and how many people went into Sweat Lodge back home, and how much people went into ceremonies back home. When ceremony people tell you we're praying for you, that doesn't mean just we're praying for you. That means they had a hochuka set up. They had an altar set up. They made a prayer. And so I just have like limitless amount of gratitude, and like deep from the bottom of my heart. Like, this whole situation was hard on my family. It was hard on my children. It was hard on us, but we never felt alone in doing this. And I always felt like we were going to win no matter what. Somebody would call me up, how you doing? Are you okay? I was like, yeah. They're like, man, this is so messed up. I was like, hey, settle down. We're going to win this shit. Don't get all sad now. We're about to win this shit. And I think that was because I felt supported. I never got into the rut. Never got stuck. And also, like, NDN Collective is like this organization that is made up of all these leaders. And so some people are like, oh, what's going to happen to NDN? Like, if you go to jail, I was like, we're good. We're still building our bike while we're riding it, but we got the right people to keep building this, and we have the right leaders in place, and we have distributed leadership that we're continuing to distribute and to continue to grow. Like, we're good, and to be in a position where you build an organization, and a lot of times you're used to being in a situation where people tell stuff to your face, but then behind your back they're like, I don't know, man, I don't know about this thing. He's gonna go to jail. It's gonna fall apart. But our partners didn't do that. Straight up, like, NDN partners didn't do that. When we weren't in the room, our partners threw down for us. And whether it be ceremony, whether it be movement partners, whether it be funding partners, that was consistent all the way through. And when that happens, that's something to know that you've been doing something right, and that you're on the right side of history, on the right cause. And so just deep gratitude for everybody out there, everybody who wrote letters, everybody who donated, everybody who showed up, everybody who wrote letters. I've been answering texts all day, and I respond to every text eventually, and that just from the bottom of my heart, like sincere, like wopila thanka chichapalo, like thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. And let's use this as an opportunity. Let's use this as an opportunity to catalyze our movement forward, to catalyze our people forward. And in closing, my heart is still heavy because people all across this country are in jails, in jails because of political stances they have taken, whether they be members of the movement for Black Lives or Black Lives Matter, whether they be members of the LGBTQ community, whether they be the children and families of people that are locked up all along the border. We are in a time where, yes, we celebrate these moments, but we have to carry the empathy and compassion for the people that are experiencing injustice today. And so as we celebrate this victory, I can't help but feel the heavy-heartedness of what's happening across this nation. And so we have to continue to remember them. We have to continue to fight for them. And we have to continue to work together and actually build the world that works for all of us, so those things don't happen over and over. And so, and that's the work the NDN Collective is dedicated to. And that is the work that the LandBack movement is about. And that is the work that we'll keep fighting for. And so thank you to everybody. Just want to give big shout outs to Sarah for holding down the host here, and for Lorenzo in the background, and Jordan and Willie and all the NDN Collective team. And of course, always good throwing down with you, Krystal, and Nataanii, wherever he's cruising right now. Wopila to him too. And so, and shout out to all the land defenders that threw down with us, both the ones who got arrested and the ones who didn't, because there wasn't 21 land defenders that day. There was 200 land defenders. And each and every one of them was there in their power in their own right. So we'll keep marching on. Doksha.
Thanks so much for that, Nick. That was awesome. And thank you again, Nick and Krystal, for joining us in this conversation. And thank you to everyone who joined us live, and those of you who are joining a little bit later. At NDN Collective, our work is devoted to building Indigenous power, and so it's really been an exciting year, and honestly, really concerning for us as a team to see our president and CEO face these charges. And so, Nick, we're really, really happy for you that you get to experience that relief, and that your family gets to experience that relief. And I know a lot of people are feeling gratitude and appreciation for you both still, and that energy carries us forward. And the struggle continues and the work continues. So with that, again, thank you everyone so much for joining us, and also want to express appreciation to our producers in the background and our communications and narrative team that make this show look beautiful. Thank you so much, Willie, Lorenzo, Jordan. You all are amazing. And learn more about NDN Collective and the work that we do at ndncollective.org. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Nataanii, do you hear us inside of there? relatives inside of Kennedy County, we wanted to remind you that you're not forgotten, that we love you, that we remember you, that we know that you're in there as a result of an unjust system. And us, we came together, your relative, to stand with you as we stand against the President of the United States, as we fight for our land. And we remember you, and we'll make prayers for you. So we're here to stand with everybody throughout this nation to call out white supremacy, to call out an end to systematic racism and oppression of our communities and our people. Tomorrow, the President of the United States will be coming to the heart of the Asheti Shakoi, and he's not welcome here. And we're here to send a message that we want Mount Rushmore closed and the return of that land back to the indigenous people. So we're here in solidarity and remembering that all throughout the system of injustice and white supremacy, you'll find indigenous people. And we also want to remind that as we do this work, we're standing in solidarity with our black brothers and sisters against this racist system of oppression. We have fought hard and long time to protect our land, and will not continue to stand for our land to be stolen from us and desecrated. So we stand at this time, at this moment in this history, and we continue on a struggle that our ancestors who have come before have fought for. Whose land? Whose land?
Your voice will not be silenced. We will walk front shove tomorrow. We say enough. We'll take back this stolen land, one rock at a time. If it's starting with Mount Rushmore, and it's not gonna end. It will never end as long as we have breath in our lungs, as long as we have blood in our bodies. We will keep marching. We will keep shouting. We will keep protesting. No, protecting. Because this is our land, and we're gonna take it back, and there's nothing they can do about it.
Our common enemy is white supremacy and systematic racism. We've seen what happened to our black brothers and sisters. We know that the movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter stands with us as indigenous people as we collectively fight for our liberation, for the collective movement for our people. And our goal is not just to resist. Our goal is to radically transform this country so that it works for everybody.
This is sacred land. This is Lakota land. This is my land. I can stand right here.
The aggression today was come out from you guys.
We want our land back.
We ain't going nowhere. This is our land. It's been our land for thousands of years.
To the Kennedy County Sheriff's Department, to the Highway Patrol, this is a warning to each and every one of you. You are unlawfully on our land without consent of our tribal leaders, in violation of our treaties. You have an opportunity now that we're giving you to stand down and vacate our land. Whose land? Our land! Whose land? Our land!
This is the land of the Asheti Shakoi.
And we're prepared to stand our ground. Today has been a proud day to be Lakota. Today has been a proud day to be indigenous. We shut down Mount Rushmore for 3 hours. And we did it in a good way. We felt that power from our ancestors. So Wopila Tonka Achicha Apolo to each and every one of you. Hands behind your back! Hands behind your back! Hands behind your back! I'm not doing it. For our people, for our Black Hills, for the Asheti Shakoi.